All right, what's up, everybody? This is Diego.
This is Carlos from Kaileway.
And we have a special guest today.
Hey, everyone. My name's Adan Perez.
Thanks for coming out, bro.
I know. We appreciate that. And thank you for everybody tuning in to Kaileway. So today we're going to have an episode with Adan. I know a few of our listeners on social media have been talking about being a Mexican or sometimes Latino background and indigeneity. What does that mean? You know, so we wanted to talk to somebody who identifies as indigenous, right? So Adan here, if you can just share a little bit about in regards to being indigenous, how do you identify, and can you let us know what indigenous means to you?
Yeah.
Just because online there's a whole conversation, you know, so on social media we'll see a lot of people talk about it, but they would also not necessarily be connected to a community. So we wanted to talk to somebody directly who belongs to one and also just elevate that.
Yeah. I will say, from an outsider looking in, it's been interesting to see how that whole dynamic has changed. Because it came from a gatekeeping almost thing to who gets to call themselves indigenous, and watching that argument unfold.
Yeah.
And someone who's kind of been walking parallel to all that happening, it's damn, can y'all get it together? Or, can y'all agree on something? You know,
Yeah.
But I feel like every generation has almost their own pocket of not issues, but they're working through how do we go about this, calling ourselves indigenous.
And it's something that Carlos and I have talked about, right? My parents are Mexican, a Mexican background, you know, but they themselves do not call themselves indigenous. You know, they're from a part of Mexico called Colima. You know, and I know that there's a lot of indigenous history within Mexico.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember meeting my paternal grandma and then asking her meeting my grandfather's siblings, and one of them, they used to call him El Indio. Right. And I was like, why do they call him that? And they were like, oh, it's because él aprendió el náhuatl de su abuelo.
Oh, okay.
You know, y por feo también.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. You know,
Cherry on top, bro.
well, there's always some anti-indigenous sentiment, you know, within the Mexican culture as a whole, you know. But I know, Carlos, you yourself are.
Yeah. So my mom is from Guatemala. She immigrated with my grandma.
Oh, okay.
In the 80s. But when I would ask them what was up, when I started kind of asking questions about indigeneity, it's always been a thing where they push it down. ¿Para qué quieres saber eso? Why do you want to know that? There's no point. We're here now. This is what matters, right? And I think, at least for me, it just seemed more of an identity development kind of journey, just figuring out who I am. Because, you know, you go to school and then you hear about people from the 1800s, and it's all American, you know, history. And it's well, what about my family, right? And then when we talk, and I understand that there's trauma in that, in the migration and coming here and what they were dealing with over there. But at least on my mom's side of the family, they're Maya. And I've asked my grandpa, because he still has some words. They speak Quiche.
Oh, okay.
And then my dad is from a pueblito in Jalisco.
Oh, okay.
But then I've also have asked questions as far as indigenous cultures and where they come from. And my tío did say they're huicholes. And after talking to Diego, it's well, I think the term is Huiraraca, right? So even then, I'm still not sure, and I'm kind of questioning, right? And I'm in that phase, right? So I think Maya, Quiche, and then Huichol or Huiraraca, and my parents immigrated to Los Angeles. That's where they met. And then I'm the first one starting to ask questions. They're what's this guy doing? Why are you asking questions? Because both sides, Mexican and Guatemalan, are hesitant to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, that's funny. So for me, a lot of my journey through this and a lot of my identity kind of ties me closer to my dad, because my dad's from Guerrero. So he's literally from a pueblo called Apipilulco. The closest big city is called Iguala. And it's kind of on the more northern side of Guerrero, close to Morelos and stuff like that. My mom's side, it's kind of like your mom, where it's why do you want to know? That's the backwards part of our family and stuff like that. So, you know, I was very much kind of that inquisitive kid and stuff. And multiple things kind of tie into the identity, because one of the reasons I even jump started this whole questioning and wanting the information was I got a lot of people say sent. I say I got sentenced to Catholic middle school. So having religion classes and having the priest who taught primarily like brown, like Latino students or
Yeah.
Latino identified students with like Pacific Islander students and like Southeast Asian folks sprinkled in there. We had a religion class, and it was very much like, oh, you should be grateful that, you know, we brought the cross and like we civilized you all and stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember I had this like Irish kind of anarchist priest as a teacher, and he brought some elders once, and this guy just went off. Like, he's like, you may be inviting me for your religion class, but I'm going to give it to these students straight. And they were like, they weren't invited. This was an invasion. They came with the sword and the spear and the cross. And like, that's how we were like, you know, it wasn't like a conquest. It was a genocide. It was an invasion. They weren't welcome here. And then he kind of planted the seed by like, you know, he's like they'll push the narrative that like to be indigenous is to be backwards, to be, you know, uncivilized, you know, or what's in the Declaration of Independence here in the U.S., the merciless Indian savages and stuff. So that jump started a lot of the question of like, why is this so taboo? Like, why is this? And the thing about my dad is, so because he comes from Guerrero, he's a survivor of what they call the dirty war in Mexico. So, if you've heard of Ayotzinapa and the 43 disappeared students from Guerrero, from what I've heard in the stories, my dad was technically supposed to go to that rural teachers college as a youngster, but this was during the dirty war, so there was a lot of civil unrest in like La Sierra de Guerrero and stuff like that, and you'll hear like folk heroes by the names of Lucio Cabañas and Genaro Vázquez who went to those schools, taught at those schools, and would go back to the pueblo. So he grew up a little bit with that identity, but because he also had to essentially flee Guerrero, and like he doesn't acknowledge this. I've kind of realized this as I've gotten older, but my dad's here in the U.S. as a refugee technically, but Mexicans don't get refugee status in the U.S. So there's a certain part of his life that got cut short, or that connection to his history, like language and things that like in the process of him immigrating, and he immigrated to the U.S. when he was like 16 or 17. So my dad, I'm 34. My dad is exactly 30 years, a month and 2 days older than me. So he's 64. So he's now lived most of his life here in the U.S. as opposed to Mexico. And he goes back periodically, but you could tell with him like where the plan of the U.S. and capitalism like worked. Because even though he comes from this like almost like Marxist, anarchist, indigenous ideology, still very much like when I was reconnecting, it was like, I didn't start reconnecting diehard until I graduated from high school in around 2009. And that was during the recession. So very much like, I would choose going to like danza spaces or ceremonies or like, what they call like dialogue circles or tertulias over like trying to find a job, just because it was like, it was a whole period growing up during the recession and becoming a legal adult. So my dad would get into arguments with me of like, oh, you need to find a job instead of going to danza and stuff. And I would look at him like, like, bro, you've been here too long. Like, Uncle Sam is like, his magic is working.
He was assimilating, huh?
Yeah, like, damn, bro.
No,
like to the point where I would kind of clown on my dad and be like, when he would cuss in Spanish, I'd be like, bro, you sound like a no sabo kid. Like, whoa. Like, I cuss better in Spanish than you at this point. But like, I had those questions of like, you know, what are our ancestors and things like that. So during middle school, very much it was like, he would throw bits of information here and there. Like growing up, my dad spoke, I know random words in Nahuatl because of my dad. So as kids, my dad would refer to my older brother and I as his chilpayates, which literally translates to his rugrats or his munchkins. So like growing up, that was one Nahuatl word that stayed with me. And like he would use random like words in Nahuatl for like conejos and stuff like that. So I didn't know that how much Nahuatl I knew till like I got involved in danza and things like that. So it definitely kind of like deepened our connection, and it's one of those classic tales of like you're not getting along with your dad for the longest time in your adolescence. But I think that kind of like brought us closer together, and to a certain extent, like me starting danza like helped him vicariously live through me, like the things he wasn't able to do because he had to immigrate here. But it also kind of like in the long run deepened our connection. And in terms of specific identity, so on my mom's side, like with the conversations I've had and the research that I've done, because this is where I'll acknowledge I have a privilege, and that's because I got involved in danza. I've noticed there's probably two roads you take when you join in danza as a brown male. One is you kind of get caught up in this like pro Mexica, like we're all Azteca, we're all Mexica identity.
The Neo Mexica.
Yeah. Or like back in like the early 2010s, there was like this Mexica movement, and it was very much like, it was a little weird because they're like, oh, everyone in Canada's Mexica, everyone like everyone south of Mexico is like Mexica, and it's it was like, we're not the only like y'all are not the only indigenous group. But the second one is, if you're lucky, and this is what happened to me, is you meet people who have already kind of done their, like, they know their identity, and like they so I was very lucky that I met a brother, and he's very much like, anonymity is the name of his game, so I'm not gonna name him, but he like my dad, he's a product of a lot of like political, social, and like indigenous movements in Mexico, and his identity is Tolteca. His people are from Hidalgo, and he is a Chilango, so him and his family immigrated to the FS, so he saw danza, he also got involved, but he was very much like, this is an identity that's not mine, so I have to do my research.
Because danza is huge in Mexico City.
Like, and then there's like two paths kind of in danza. There's a sect because, after the invasion or the conquest, people had to hide a lot of things in with Catholicism. So a lot of the danza groups that came out in like the early like 1900s were still very much tied to Catholicism. They're called concheros. The other side, it's kind of a more newer term. People use like mexicayo or mexicanidad, and that's kind of trying to like safeguard or like almost reinvent a lot of like what the Catholic essence of danza like became. And it's like almost like trying to decolonize, but sometimes it can get a little cultish. So I'm gonna say I took the third route, which was I had someone who like helped me do my research and ask my dad like the right questions. And that's what slowly started like deepening the bond with my dad, because he was like, oh, like you're asking me like detailed questions that I didn't expect, or that at some point I wanted you as my son to ask me. So when I earned the right to make my regalia and danza and stuff, I noticed my dad would come around a lot more. And we would have more conversations. But there's certain aspects of indigeneity that my dad holds even without saying it. And one of the things is like indigenous people were big about working with the land, working the land in general, is like, we are the land is us. My dad has a green thumb like no other. Like this man can make anything grow anywhere. And that's something that, like when I was a youngster and we were kind of beefing it, like I kind of like almost ripped that like connection. But the older I got, it was like, this is how me and my dad connect. Like I would be one of the few people that would consistently water his plants and stuff. And the older I got, it was like, okay, like this is something that's ours from like generations past and stuff. So that was something that I took. But so I took this route where like I met this brother, and he was very much like, we're not all Mexica. Like even a lot of the danzas in here are not purely Mexica. Because there's certain danzas that pay homage to other indigenous nations. Like there's certain danzas that they take from like the Maya Quiche people of like, there's a juego de pelota danza. There's a danza literally like dedicated to like Chichimeca people and Apache people and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the school of thought where I was started developing it. Where it was very much like, yeah, I'm in danza, but Mexica's not my identity. Like it's deeper. And then, so on my dad's side, after doing research and stuff and like finding out like, and this is kind of funny, I say this a lot more now, but like I know a lot of people like very much fetishize the Mexica, but after doing a lot of like deep history dive and like even reading certain like historically based texts, it's like the Mexica were kind of the equivalent of the indigenous United States, where they just went on expeditions trying to take over.
They were very imperial, right?
Yeah, like there's like certain pueblos that they were never able to like, oh, you owe us like tribute or taxes, like the Purepecha people from Michoacan. Like, so the story goes is like the Mexica sent like messengers and stuff, and the Purepecha apparently laughed and sent back the heads of the messengers saying, oh yeah, come get this like tribute and stuff. Like, and there's other nations and stuff. So like it was very much like, oh, like especially from Guerrero, like we're not like, there's Nahuatl speaking people there, but it wasn't originally like that. So like my question was like, oh, like how did this happen? And in Guerrero, like at least where my dad's from, the indigenous people were the Matlatzinca people.
Yeah.
And they kind of like, the Mexica came and they're like, oh, like, hi, we're the Mexica. By the way, now you owe us tribute or else, you know, you're done. Like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
so it was very much like, okay, I'm Nahua by indigenous colonization, but Matlatzinca because that's the original people that occupied Guerrero.
Yeah.
And where my mom's from in Durango, this one was a little bit more tricky because I had to ask a lot of like my great uncles and like my cousins and tios and stuff like that, who the older I got, I found out some of them practice ceremony like in Durango and stuff. So they're like, oh, like we're just like with the Huichol and Huirarica people, a lot of indigenous people in Durango also have like their name that was given to them and the name that they call themselves. So in Durango, it's the Tepehuanes, or they're very much tied to the To'ono Otam of like Arizona.
Yeah.
But they call themselves like Odami or Otam.
Yeah.
So on my mom's side, like that's where that comes from. And like and I've only recently started calling him my grandfather, my mom's dad. I used to call him the sperm donor for a lot of time. But his family's like tied, I think, in some way to Sonora. So like Yaqui people and stuff. And like as someone who like was an ethnic studies major but specialized in indigenous studies, like if you know anything about history, Yaqui are the first ones to kind of pimp the system of the U.S. because they're the first ones to get federal recognition here in the U.S. Like they're the only nation from Mexico that's been able to accomplish that. So
is there a card? A card comes with that, no?
Yeah,
like
Bureau
card,
of Bureau of Indian Affairs card and stuff, and that's a whole thing too because people are like blood quantum, like the only things in the U.S. that are like tested for purity are like natives, horses, and dogs. Like what does that say about you know everything? So for me, like growing up, having these people who are very much like know your identity, give your people like a voice. If not, they're gonna be overshadowed by this like proto Mexica identity, and everyone's like gonna think they're the same. So I went through like that kind of whole process of like discovery and like doing my research. And you know, I'll be honest, I still have a ways to go, but I think like I learned enough to where like I consider myself kind of a bridge sometimes for people. Like if I've noticed like the way I walk and speak and the way I talk about my identity, folks are like, well, how did you, where did you? And it's like, well, I can give you some of the information that was given to me like that. Yeah. Because of modern technology, you can find like government records in a certain sense and like go through like the churches and stuff to find out like records. So that's kind of how I view myself right now. But when I think of like indigenous, like it's a responsibility for those of us who claim it. And I know this is going to tie in later, but I've spoken to folks from like south of the border, and the way we look at it in big cities is very much like, oh, who gets to call themselves indigenous and stuff. And what we're kind of arguing here in the U.S. in the major cities, like I'm not going to say all, but there's a lot of folks like south of the border who are like, if you don't claim this, then some white anthropologist is just going to start writing about our people. And they're going to be writing like a lot of like historical like lies and just like stereotypes. Whitewashing our history.
Well, they'll create the narrative.
So like
again, which is something that we see, right? Like Columbus discovered the Americas, but it's like people were existing here, right?
Or people going to India, learning stuff there, and then bringing it back here and claiming it as their own.
It's Christian yoga. Right. You get me? But you know, and I like something that you mentioned, Adan. I think kind of like the oral history that comes with asking your parents questions, right? And the people that you have access to, you know. And I think, like, I'm very glad that like you asking your parents that, like, it was such a positive response, you know. And I also say that sometimes you kind of need to keep a backbone in the sense of like, I remember asking my dad like, oh, ¿qué pasó con todos los indígenas en Colima? He was like, oh, pues todos los mataron. Los mataron. You know, and he was actually wrong in that statement because when I went to visit Colima, like I was asking questions, you know, and there was still a lot of people that identified as indigenous and are connected in the sense of being part of Comala, which is a city in Colima, and then also in Tecoman. You know, so it's like my dad himself being schooled in Mexico gets this narrative, right? That like, oh, pues vino la conquista, ya todos somos mestizos, and that's it. Los indígenas ya no existen. You know, and it was something that like as part of my reconnecting journey, I was like, well, let me ask my parents, you know, who I have access to, that question, and kind of just sorting out like, well, yeah, you're kind of ignorant on this one, my boy. Like, let me just take it at face value.
Yeah.
At face value, you know. So
it really gets to a point where you start to realize like, wow, my parents don't know everything.
Yeah.
exactly,
Right?
yeah.
And I do remember watching like some sort of podcast or something, but the guy was talking about how, because you mentioned a little bit about the relationship with your father, and what he was talking about was in the beginning when we're children, we see our dads as like these heroes,
Yeah.
right? But then we get into adolescence and we see them almost as an op, right? Like an opposition, someone who we have constant conflict with. And then as we get into adulthood, we start to actually empathize and maybe understand like, oh wait, yeah, I think I know why you were the way that you were, right? Yeah. And then just going back on your story, it really seems like instead of public traditional high school, you did Catholic school. You started to kind of go through that, you know, that realm, and then a brother came and started to kind of give a counter narrative, and then that started to spark these questions like, wait a minute, what about this or what about that? Started to ask your dad, you know, some questions, and then that created a little bit of conflict, but through more like you pushing and pushing and pushing, joining danzas and asking your mom then also the same questions and trying to create this narrative like, wait, who am I? What am I? What's my purpose here?
Yeah.
What do you think pushed you forward? Like, where did you find the purpose, or did you have a purpose, or were you feeling like, I want to create a purpose because this is important to me? I guess, why was it important for you to continue to push and push and push?
And this is where the only time I'll give like Catholic school credit is like having heard a lot of this, like, oh, you should be lucky, like your people are savages. And then I'm very much like, I'm going to jokingly but seriously say this, like rebellion kind of runs in my both sides of my family. So it's very much like, you're an authority figure, but you're saying this. So clearly there has to be some sort of like lie that you're telling me, and there has to be some sort of truth somewhere. So that's like what pushed me.
Okay.
Yeah, no, very much like I know this fat white guy's going to tell me my story and stuff. Yeah. And like I would ask questions here and there, and even my dad would drop gems just because one time we were talking about the concept of identity, and he's like, oh, like what are you learning in danza and stuff? And I would like say like the word mexica, and he's like, oh, like en Guerrero nosotros no nos decimos mexica, nos decimos nahuas. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And then later, you know, finding out like they're the ones that kind of colonized Guerrero and stuff. But like, yeah, no, he would still drop gems and stuff like that. And even I'm gonna say like a high point, and I wasn't there to witness this, but I call the like this brother, the one that mentored me, I call him like my big homie or my big brother in danza. They did like a ceremony for commemoration for Los Muertos in like 2021. I wasn't able to be there because I was down here, but my dad would still go. I would tell him like, no, usted vaya, like, you know, be in community and stuff like that. I had always wondered if these two sat in a room and had a conversation, what would that go like? Yeah. And then next thing I know, my homies are texting me pictures. They're like, hey, your dad and the homie are having a conversation. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, great minds are sitting together and
You're
talking.
Just imagining what they're talking about.
And then, because my dad's generation, in a sense, the way because I asked my big homie, like, oh, how was that talk? And he was like, honestly, like your dad's generation pretty much mentored mine. So it's like talking to an elder for me. And I was like, dang. And no, and it's funny because like similarly to what you said, the older I've gotten, the more I've realized kind of my dad's, you know, our parents are never going to say they carry traumas. But like my dad wouldn't tell us stories to my older brother and I. Like we had to find through like other people. Yeah. So these stories that he has about like the dirty war and like Lucio Cabañas and like him literally, because when I was at a sweat lodge one day and this guy found out my family was from Guerrero, and he's like, no, pregúntale a tu papá de Lucio Cabañas y Genaro Vázquez. And I get home and I ask my dad, I'm like, do these names ring familiar?
Do they mean something?
You unlock the memory
no,
for him?
He's like, we were there the day they busted Lucio Cabañas out of federal prison in Chilpancingo, which is the capital of Guerrero. So I was looking at my dad like, sick ass fool, like, who are you?
Hey,
like,
he's been in the trenches, bro. Like.
So I think like, even like to me, the way I look at like approaching this identity and the responsibility, it's not just for me, but it's for my dad who didn't get a chance to because of immigration and capitalism. But it's also like how many folks haven't had this opportunity for one reason or another, like state sanctioned violence or like immigration and things like that. So that's where for me, like it's a responsibility for us who are able to find this information of like, you know, learn it, but also like safekeep it as well and like share it when needed, because right now I know there's a big struggle within like gatekeeping and like what I call safekeeping.
Yeah.
And for someone who's been in danza and like sweat lodges and ceremony circles, like it's almost like I have an innate cautiousness like when outsiders come in. And I know like I'm an outsider too, because a lot of the ceremonies that I do aren't from like Mexico. They're from like North South Dakota. They're like sweat lodge, Sundance ceremonies that like the Lakota people have like brought over and stuff. So I also know to a certain extent like I'm an outsider in someone's circle, but we always talk about in like these ceremony circles approaching everything in a good way. So it's like very much like mind your P's and Q's, know when to ask questions, but also know when to shut up and listen to information.
Yeah.
And like just take everything with a grain of salt. Right. Because I know one of the big things for people who talk about like, oh no, people are gatekeeping, is like there's this sense of like almost rudeness that they feel the experience. But the thing is, when you've lived generations through colonization and you've had whole governments trying to impede on your basic way of life, you're gonna retreat inward a little bit, and you're gonna be very cautious of like who's coming in, who's asking questions, why are you asking these questions, what's your deal? And I've seen that too, where people come in asking questions in danza, in like sweat lodge and ceremony circles, and it's like, why are you asking specific questions about like certain sacred things? Like, what's your intention here?
Yeah.
So like for me, like it grew into like, okay, this is a responsibility, but this is also like walking like just be cordial and be respectful at all times, even when you know it's not your community.
You know what's crazy though? Right now, when you mentioned how your dad had like this hesitancy to have these conversations, but as you start to kind of ask the questions and you push forward, like you mentioned, right? They told you to, hey, ask your dad specifically about this guy, and then you ask your dad, and then you know the memory kind of gets unlocked. You know what I think? You can come in. You know what I think about a lot, oftentimes, because my parents are the same. Like they won't accept that they have some sort of traumas, but I think they don't accept that they have the traumas because that's not the way that they would articulate their past, right? That's not what they would articulate as their experiences. Like así la vida, right? Yeah. We go with what we go through, and we're here now. Te aguantas, because honestly, there was no sense of like slowing down and thinking, and I always think about like emotional processing and emotional regulation, which is processing what emotion you're feeling and then regulating how you bring out that emotion, because no one can take away the emotion that you're feeling. Like you feel it, but you do have control over how you bring out that emotion, right? And so oftentimes it's like, well, there was no time to really think about these things, right? It is what it is. We're here now. So shut up and work. Like, that's it. Move forward, right? But then you go to school, you go to college, and then you start to learn this terminology, which is also a privilege. And I think a lot of it is Western terminology. Like, okay, well, this is what I'm learning, and these are the terms that they're giving me to explain what I'm feeling inside and to explain what I'm dealing with and what I'm observing in my life. And I guess you try to put it through your lens. And I think that's where a lot of the conflict comes. So then you try to tell your family who's not from here, hey, this is what you're doing. This is what you're feeling. Of course, they're going to be hostile. Of course, there's going to be conflict, right? Yeah. But then you push forward. I still believe in having that conversation and then just bringing out the emotions. I mean, little by little, right? But that's going to be hard, and it's always going to be met with hostility.
And I think it's something important that you bring up too, because I think like being like Mexican American, specifically like from like the LA area, you kind of embody the dual identity, right? Like, oh, you're Mexican, but you're also from the US. And then there also tends to be like a long history of like Chicanismo within the LA area, right? So the narrative within Chicanismo, at least when I learned it when I was in college, which was the first time I was exposed to it, right? Which is, I grew up in South Central, which was very different from like East LA, which is where we heard Chicano, right? Like in South Central, you were just Mexican, bro, like, or you were black. Like it was either either one. Either one of those two things, right? So I think when I learned about like Chicanismo, being Chicano, they kind of homogenized it into two identities. You're either like from the Aztec people or you're from like the Maya, right? Which they themselves kind of like had this cultural hegemony within Mesoamerica, right? So then when the Spanish came, like they adopted part of those customs into like the Mexican lexicon, right? Like the identity, right? You have like Banco Azteca Estadio Azteca, like kind of like the narrative that everybody was there, right? But like when I was learning about my family's history, well, the history of Colima, right? They were Nahua speaking people, but they themselves didn't identify as Mexica or Aztec. They identify themselves as Colimecas, right? Or some people would call them Aztecos, because when the Spanish arrived, it was modern day Tecoman, you know, and the people by there would go by Tecos, you know. So that's kind of like the history. But again, going into like Western education and kind of like the history, which a lot of it has been almost distorted in a sense, right? So I think it kind of leads to like the second question of what are your thoughts on like the terms disconnected, detribalized, which are terms that you hear within, like, I've at least heard them like within social media, right? Like in conversation, you know. And how does that tie into like what people call reconnecting, which is something that you mentioned like earlier in.
Are those, just real quick, just because I'm ignorant to this, are those bad words or not?
No, like, to be honest, like, I'm very much like kind of in agreement that like they're real terms and stuff, because it's the reality, you know. Like a lot of folks don't know the nation or the people that, you know, come from and stuff. And you know, I've come in contact with some folks, and some folks are very like receptive. They're like cool, like, yeah, like, help me find the information, like, you know, like maybe put me on the track and kind of let me run with it. And there's folks who are like, you know, in similar situations where like I've asked my parents and they're not giving me anything, or, you know, they don't know like what our deal is, or like they don't know how many generations back we go, like, to this pueblo in Mexico, you know. So it's, to me, it's fair, it's valid, you know. Like a lot of folks, you know, are relatively disconnected from that and stuff. And it's funny because I've gone through like different periods, and I've been on different like either like spaces or like for me, like 2012, like, it's gonna sound random, but it also kind of interconnects. Is I was a huge like person, like I was really into Tumblr.
Okay,
and there's like a whole,
that was
like
the Tumblr era, bro.
So there's like a whole like Tumblr like indigenous like side and stuff, and even among each other, like there was like conversations that would happen of like, we would kind of go at it with the Mexica movement fools, because like what I said earlier, they're like claiming they're claiming Africa's Mexica and stuff like that too. Which, you know, that's gonna set a whole chain reaction with the Afrocentrists and stuff, and like the Hotep people and like
the Black Israelites.
Like, they're gonna come, like they're gonna enter the chat and everything like that. So I would like watch these things from afar, and like I'm still getting information from my big homie and stuff. So, but I'm like, we'll have conversations of the things we see, and he's like, dang, like, us in the cities are a trip, because we put so much like trivialization on names and labels and things like that. But if you go back to like the other side, it's very much like, this isn't rocket science, people. But I know, given like the current state of things, like even that like whole mentality of it's not rocket science, give your people a voice. Like that's where I kind of come in, and I'm like, we have to keep these things sometimes, because you don't know the intention people come with it. So very much like I have homies and stuff. Like I don't really use the terms myself, or if I do, I tend to use more reconnecting when I do, just because it's, you know, it's the reality. Like even though like I kind of went at it like even when I walked into ethnic studies, like I had already had this like you know, these experiences, and I had this knowledge. So like going into like Chicano study spaces, like I would pretty much go at it with the profes, specifically like about the indigenous side of things, where they would like, you know, like you said, like, oh, everyone's either Maya or Mexica, there is no in between. And I'm like, I had already, you know, heard names like Wirarica and Purepecha and like Tzotzil and stuff like that. So I'm coming in there and I'm like, profe, like there's so many other like languages. I don't like to call them dialects, because to me Spanish and English are like dialects, because it's like the bastardization of like Latin, Germanic, and influence from
Castellano.
Castellano.
It's a congregation of just a bunch of shit.
So for me, I'm like, the indigenous languages of Mexico are like languages to me. Like I'll be like,
that's a great way to put it.
Bro. Like first of all, like I have to disagree with you there, because I don't think these are like, you know, dialects, but also like there's more like Mexico's a mosaic of indigenous nations. You know, it's not just Mexica or Maya. It's like you have your Purepecha, you have your Raramuri people in like Chihuahua. You know, you have people all over the place, but it's just it's almost like when you look at like the civil rights or the Chicano movement, like even though there might have been movement elsewhere, where they focus it on is East LA.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of like the similar thing, but with indigenous people, it's like who gets all like the fame and glory?
Yeah.
Like either like Azteca, Mexica people or Mayas. Like there is no in between.
And I like that you mentioned that because my experience with like Chicano studies, like I think when I took Chicano studies classes like at the community college and then I transferred to like UCLA and we're like even UCLA had like a big major movement to have Chicano studies on campus, right? But I remember being like in a class and then one of the professors said that like you can't be Chicano if you're not Mexican descent. And I was like, what the fuck? Like at least to me personally, that didn't make sense because my introduction to being Chicano was like the socio-political identity, right? Like understanding that you're against white supremacy, capitalism, and highlighting that like the other can be a part of that, right? So like growing up in LA, like I had homies who were Guatemalan, Salvadoran American, Peruvian and everything. I was like, they went through the same thing that I did. So like to exclude them from this identity that goes against like capitalism, white supremacy, and the betterment of the other, like feels almost exclusive as to how white supremacy is to how you're phrasing it to me, you know? So I was like, okay, like I dropped that class, bro. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, you know, and I know people will define it differently, you know, but to me, it was kind of just like, I think the cognitive dissonance between those two things, like that group doesn't want us to wear our own group, but then when you're in that own group, you're also being exclusive to like other people's. Like, wait, bro, like this doesn't make any sense, you know? And I think that's something that like caused me to like take a step back from like the Chicano studies that I was doing. Like I do identify as a Chicano, you know, but like my definition would be someone like the socio-political identity, not necessarily like your descent, right? Because again, when I know there's the cultural hegemony of like Mexicans in California and all that aspect, even in like in Texas and Arizona and stuff like that. But I think there's a form of erasure that also happens and the elevation, right, of like the narrative that feeds into like the Neo-Mexica movement, like, well, we were all Aztec, we were all Maya, like, and it's like, well, that's not necessarily true when you begin to like question it. But I've been in spaces where people will perpetuate like that narrative, and it's been like, like
I would give them just a bit of credit, just because my wife, she majored in Chicano studies. Oh, okay. Did you major in Chicano studies?
No,
you took some classes.
Yeah, I took classes, and like I kind of. So it shifted for me because when I started growing out my hair, like, and this is weird. I had like a weird like. Parteaguas. I had this weird parteaguas with like the Mexican community because as soon as I started growing out my hair, I experienced a lot of homophobic comments from the older Mexican men. So I actually, this is probably the first time I vocalized this out loud, but I had a lot of resentment towards like being Mexican because it was like, and then in my family, one of my uncles, like his mom's side is from Oaxaca and his dad's side's from El Salvador. His family actually used to live by USC, but they're the folks that like got priced out of the area and stuff. So
displaced.
No. And then like hearing his immigration story and like, I had a lot of built up resentment because it was like, yo, how are we as Mexicans going to complain of how they treat us when we cross the border when in Mexico they essentially have like goon squads dedicated towards like anyone from Central South America that's like passing through Mexico or has overstayed their welcome or whatever. Like, so for me, I had this weird period where it was like almost like denying like Mexicanidad or whatever. And then like just going straight indigenous. And that's actually something that I've kind of been healing within myself, especially with like the partner I have, because she's in her own journey too. And she was a history and a Chicano studies major. And we would kind of go at it for here and there. Because I would be like, I would unfortunately sometimes use the phrase like, oh, you Chicano motherfuckers. No más vienen y hacen su desmadre and like, you know, distorting philosophies and stuff. But it was also like my own wounds and stuff with like Chicanismo, with like Mexicans and stuff that like I realized was like I was bleeding on other people and stuff. But like there was a period where I was a Chicano studies major, but then it was kind of like, more like native indigenous studies and stuff, because it's like I've shared space and I've built community. Like there was a period where I would rather kick it with like Apache, Lakota, Navajo people than with Mexicans and stuff, because I was like, we're going to a sweat lodge, and like the more like actual native relatives were the ones either putting in work, being respectful, and sometimes you had unfortunately some Chicano folks that would come in and they're like, either to themselves or they just come in, use the resources and leave and stuff. And for me, I was like, hey man, that's not cool. Like, first of all, these ceremonies, like, there's a connection between ceremonies we had like south of the border and like sweat lodges or what they call nippies and stuff like that. But like, this isn't your medicine, so you should come correct.
Right.
So I had like a little bone to pick with like Chicanos and stuff. So at some point, like I was a Chicano studies major, but then I was kind of like, I don't think I fit in here. The more like I got into the complexities of my own identity, it was like, and which is funny because I was still in Med-Chow, but I was devil's advocate. I was like, the indigenous delegate would like to speak here. Like,
you're walking into the meeting and there was
here he comes again.
Yeah, and I like that you bring that, because it is important to kind of be like inquisitive, because there's also like a privilege in being in higher education, right? And I think a lot of the stuff can get distorted and almost becomes like an echo chamber, right? Like, and to anybody listening, like, I'm a proud Chicano. Before they be like, oh, this was against his people.
That's just talking shit.
He's against his people. No. Like, I'm a proud Chicano, but
the point that I had wanted to make, because I think as far as like the history when you're taking Chicano study, that gets muddled.
Yeah, it does.
I think that gets difficult to have a conversation with. But I think what I did want to give credit to was just the aspect of being able to critically think and ask questions.
Yeah.
Right. Because me and her have had, a lot of different conversations, and a lot of it had to do with just the process of creating an argument and making sure that you back it up with evidence. So the history may get muddled, but it's like, are you coming with like evidence, research, primary sources to like build on that? And if you're not, and you're just basing it off of just feeling, then it's like, okay, like I'm going to beat you in an argument then.
Which is, it taught me that, and then when you ask those questions into the narrative
Back
that people
to
are pushing to you, they're like, wait, no. Like, bro, what?
Here's
like,
my reference list. This is how I know this.
Because again, like even today within Mexico, there's like 68 to 70 indigenous groups today, but the two dominant groups that you hear consistently within Chicano studies is the Aztec, the Maya. Is very much Mesoamerican like coded, and I think a lot of that probably deals with the way that they draw information, which is probably what they find on books and stuff like that. But it also dismisses like the oral history and what people outside of like Western academia have been saying. Like, we've been here, we've been existing, and it kind of just highlights like the names that people would go by, right? Like we mentioned, Huichol, but which is a name given to them, and people, but they themselves were referred as Huiraraca, and I think it's the it ties into like the third question already, right? Like the Chicanos that claim indigeneity but don't have a group or nation, like, is there, because other people will say that Chicano is just like, accepting your indigenous ancestry, right? So like, what are your thoughts on that? And like, do you think that they contribute to like indigenous erasure, right? Like, because my opinion would be that like, and this is something that like I've shared with Carlos, where it's like, I don't think you would call yourself Chicano if you knew the nation or the people that you come from.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's my philosophy on it, based on like the people that I've been able to speak to and things like that. But then there's other people that was like, well, no, Chicanos accepting that you have indigenous ancestry, so you're automatically Chicano, and it's like, like it brings the question, right? So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
It's loaded. It's a loaded question. It's a loaded question.
No, it's funny because I've also seen people claim like, oh, I'm an indigenous Chicano, and like for like folks like me and my mentor, like we'll do the dog side term. Like, huh? Like we're like, no, because what you're saying, like, I'm not gonna generalize all Chicanos, but there is
which is important, right?
Yeah, like there is a high percentage of folks who are Chicano that either have not started that process, or maybe looking into it, stuff like that. So they don't have all the facts. But there are also Chicano communities where like it's almost, and I hate that I'm going to say this, but it's almost like a willing ignorance, because I've been in situations with folks where like they'll hear me talk about my identity and stuff, and I'll always offer myself I'll offer myself, because I've gone through periods of where like at the beginning, like I was like, oh, shout it from the rooftops, like whoever wants to learn, like come through. And then once you've been through some like trauma in like the danza spaces and stuff, you like retreat inward a little bit, and you're like, like if you want questions answered, you come to me. Or now where I'm like, hey, I'm the bridge. Like if you see, or if something sparks a question in you and you want to ask, by all means, ask away. So I brought this to the table sometimes in certain spaces, and there's folks who are very much like, like they're hungry, like they want to learn more, like they know that, and they've heard stories in their family, and it's like there has to be more to this. Like, they're like, oh, this is what, like, perfect example is like, now I don't see, like, it's not just Mexicas and Mayas or Aztecas that get pushed to the forefront. Now, like, we have huge waves of, like, Mixteco and Zapoteco people coming in. So
especially in LA.
Yeah, no. And then I had a professor for a native diaspora class, my first spring quarter at UC Riverside, 2019. And the professor was Mixteco. And one of the things he touched on, because the whole class, to give you like a Spark Notes version, is he was like, I'm going to teach you what the ideology was of everyone who came and wrecked this whole side of the world. Mm-hmm. So, we usually clown on white people and be like, oh, they have no culture. But he showed us like the deep roots of like capitalism and like even Marxism. And he's like, that's their culture. Yeah. So one of the things he talked about was erasure. And he's like, as a Mixteco person, hearing folks claim like Oaxaca, California, like, because that's a big thing now too, is like folks from Oaxaca. And he was like, that to me is also leading to the erasure of like California nations. Yeah. Like, especially, like here in LA and then Ventura County, you have big waves of like, Zapoteco, Mixteco, like folks, but you also have a lot of like native like reservations and stuff going towards Ventura County. So it's like, and because my partner went to Channel Islands, I was in Ventura County a lot more too. So it was like, I see it. Like it's, which is a little tricky because, Guerrero, Oaxaca, and Chiapas are the three poorest states in Mexico. Yeah. So they already get hated on in Mexico. Yeah. So navigating like this realization of like, hey, that word is also leading to the erasure of folks. Yeah. Navigating that was a little tricky because it's like, I don't want to approach it as like, hey, motherfucker, like, don't say that shit because you don't know who's going to be like off put by this. But it was like, that is a tricky and taboo subject in and of itself sometimes too.
And I like that you bring it up because it's something that you see like online, especially given like the current climate where like, well, we didn't cross the border crossed us. You get me? Like, we're indigenous to this land, but it's like, but the indigenous group you pertain to wasn't necessarily like in California, in Arizona, in New Mexico, right? And so
we've had that conversation before. It's like you're all the way up here, but your family's from like central southern Mexico. And
you're claiming Aztec and you're central Mexico, and like you're saying California belongs to you, like because the border didn't cross you, and it's like, well, you're leading to the erasure of like the Tongva people and stuff like that have had history within California, and many other different groups, right, that like would exist within that, So I like that you bring that up because I think it's something that people hear the narrative, right, given the current climate, and then they run with it. But it's also like you yourself now are perpetuating like what you're claiming to fight.
That's interesting. Just because you mentioned that your partner's but studied in Channel Islands. Yeah. See, Chicano studies, I feel like would be vastly different than up there versus like. I think so, yeah. So then that's the other thing, right?
So that part's interesting because one of her femtors, who I actually know from mutual like profes and stuff from upstate, like they ended up renaming Channel Islands, like among friends and stuff, to like CSU Chicano Islands. So they like different, like there's regional like ways of viewing Chicanismo. Like I've noticed like down here. And like up north too, and even the Central Coast and stuff. So it's always interesting to see how the different regions of California like approach being Chicano, and like even when it comes to like indigeneity and stuff, like, oh, how are you gonna view it? Because I've met folks who are very like, I mean, we always hear like the East LA like Chicano and stuff, where it's like,
but that's the new Chicano too, though, right?
But you
like,
see how like approaching Chicanismo, but because like Diane, my wife went Cal State Northridge, and that was like the beginning of like the EOP program, the Educational Opportunity Program. And there was a lot, like that's probably the biggest, I think, among the CSUs, the biggest Chicano studies program that there is. So she does she learned a lot from that. And I think it really just depends on the professors that you're getting and who's willing to have those types of conversations where they're not just, no, it's just, Mexica is just Aztec, right? Yeah. So I think it really differs. Like, in the higher space, when we talk about Chicano, higher ed space, when we talk about Chicanismo, man, that's all over the place too.
And it's a very good point, like on how it can differ, because like my experience was like the very militant, like very like militant? This is like you follow, like it was very top down. Like the idea is that you have indigenous ancestry, either from the Aztec, the Mexica, the Aztec or the Maya. But capitalism, white supremacy has erased that. You gotta like be against that, But it's like the nuance between that, like it was lost in the idea of like just be against capitalism, be against white supremacy. But it's like you're pushing this identity to me, but when I question that identity and like my space within it, you're like, no, you're Chicano. Like,
with an indigenous
you know,
lens, it's like, it's
like,
really,
well,
no one knows how to have that conversation, you know. And I think it's because,
but it feels intentional sometimes. Like it's to recruit numbers. That's how I experienced it. You know, like they just recruit numbers because we gotta have like the numbers to combat, like you know, like the opposition, right? That's how I experienced it. You know, and like. It leads to the next question, right? Like the people that claim that being Mexican equals like indigenous, right? Like, and my experience with like my partner was like, again, within like the Chicano identity is like she identifies as a Chicana, right? But again, like her family's from like Yucatan, and there's a lot of Yucatec Maya population in Yucatan. So it's like the erasure she experiences in higher ed, where it's like you're either Azteca or Maya, but it's like, what specific Maya group would she belong to? Because we do know that there's differences, right? But she also gets lost in the Neo-Mexica, the Azteca, like, oh, this and that and that. So it's like being able to see the erasure in real time. You're like, whoa, like, because there's a lot of people that would be like, oh, well, my parents are from Mexico. I was born in California, therefore I am Chicano. But your parents settled in Mexico and then they came over here, and like you have no actual ancestry to like Mexico, you know? So it's like, it almost gets like lost within the nuance of that, you know. So I do hear online like the Mexican equal indigenous. What do you think about that, and like what do you would like to say about it? Because I don't think it's true.
That
you
part
know,
is very complex too, because it's.
But the Mexico flag has the águila, like
but also like I've heard arguments for the flag too. Like indigenous people are like, Eagle was like the sky protector, and the serpiente was like the knowledge on the ground, and that's like two best friends going at it. So they're like, from an indigenous standpoint, they're like, that image is false because, you know, it's two like indigenous entities going at it with each other. It's like the eagles represent a lot of like the wisdom from like the sky, and they get the energy from the sun, and then for a lot of like, I'm going to say Nahua specific people, like serpents are very sacred because it's like, it's the animal that spends the most time with its belly touching the earth. Yeah. So it also has a lot of wisdom from earth. So, you know, with the whole like, oh, like the flag is like indigenous and stuff, like I've heard the other side where folks are like, that is a bastardization of what like, you know, because I don't know if y'all have seen like the Mexica flag and stuff.
I haven't seen it.
So it like there's a symbol that like the eagle carries, which is supposed to be the duality of water and fire, and not what they call it Atlashinoli. But also even that flag is more recent too. So it's also like, well, what's what?
So is it like a pan Nahua?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Like, I feel like that is very complex. Like to say all Mexicans are indigenous, because, you know, like Mexico's a mosaic of nations. Not everyone is. You know, like. And I feel like this whole notion of we as like, so I don't use the word Chicano. There was a term that was introduced to me called Mexico Estadounidense, which is a mouthful, but it's very much like, even like Mexican American, it felt like, well, you know, the U.S. is America. Like there's more to America than just, you know, like.
Well, United States
of America. Like Mexico also counts.
You're United Statesian, bro.
Well,
you know, like, I've heard of it.
Isn't Mexico los Estados Unidos mexicanos?
Yeah. But we're all America, essentially.
Yeah, it's all America.
Like, but the U.S. seems to be like, claim the central body,
like,
you know.
Even sometimes within Chicanismo, there's this whole like America kind of like attitude about things. So no, like it's tricky in Mexico because similarly to you, I don't fully feel like every Mexican is like half indigenous and half Spanish. As sometimes even like Chicano studies is known for pushing as well. Like some people have evidently more indigenous presence in their blood features and everything. And then some people are like, you know, they're as light skinned as the paper this, you know, these questions were printed on and stuff. And it's like, sometimes you'll have like but it's also like, it's funny because to watch similar things happen here in the U.S., like sometimes you'll see Lakota people from North Dakota and they're this light, but they're the ones that hold all like the stories, culture, and knowledge and stuff too. So I feel like it's also like, it's it's so loaded and discombobulated. Like it's something that I'm like, I don't firmly believe we're all like supremely indigenous and like Spanish, but I know like there's some of us that have more of the blood in us, and that's also a side thing because I've been kind of, after hearing of where like, you know, folks will do like their DNA testing and stuff like that, and then after hearing like which parts of the government are like founding these things, for some reason like I don't do a whole lot of things, and news will come out and I'm like, that's why I didn't touch that. Like 23andMe, like finding out like who's, you know, like I think it's like what the Mormons run 23andMe.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Like one of those sites, and then apparently finding out they're like colluding with the government to get all our information.
Oh damn.
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm gonna let y'all do the 23andMe thing, but I've like, and this is where my privilege of like being able to talk to my dad, because the older I've gotten, like we said earlier, like now I'm able to have a lot more of these conversations and finding out like how many generations back, like does the family go in Guerrero and stuff. So it's like, I don't need some Mormon fool giving me this weird DNA test. Like I just talk to my pops. And
So I think that is a good segue into the next question, you know, and I like that you bring up like the 23andMe, because there's also like ancestry, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is more of a general question, like the idea of like Latinos with indigenous ancestry. Can they claim indigenous? If so, how? If not, then why? In the sense of like, you take a DNA test. Like, I'll be honest, I took a DNA test from Ancestry and it was like, oh, you're 47% indigenous Mexico, and then the other parts, different parts of the world, right? So like, if you mention like the phenotypical traits and stuff like that, like if that blood exists within you, can you identify as indigenous, or is indigenous more of a political, cultural term? And if so, are you then racially indigenous? Or if you identify as mestizo, I don't even use the word mestizo. I don't even use that, you know. But like, let's say there was like a census, right? Oh, describe your race. What would you then select? Because I feel like if you select white, which what some Latinos do, Caucasian, white, right? Like, are you then not contributing to the erasure of the indigenous ancestry and blood that runs within you? Because like, my experience visiting Mexico and learning about it, like there is phenotypical traits that people exhibit and blood that runs through their veins that existed pre-contact. But some of them will not necessarily identify as indigenous and more culturally mestizo Mexican. So I know it's a very loaded question, you know, so I guess like wherever we go with it.
So I'm going to start off by saying, and this is where like my dad kind of comes in. So all the times that I remember doing the census, my dad was like, you put indigenous as your identity. And he's the one
as your race?
Yeah. Like, he's like, not white. He's like, we're indigenous. And then he would tell me like, oh, right now I'm at Latzinca and stuff. So this is even like before I started, you know, college and even danza. Like I remember doing like the 2010 census, and he was like, nope, don't put white. He's like indigenous.
But that's a write-in, no? You would have to write
the other, right?
Yeah. So like he's like, write this and that, and like I did it, and I remember him just smiling with pride, and he's like, yeah, finally we're
so somewhere in the catacombs of that data, there's like right there.
Record.
Just throw it out there, bro.
Oh yeah, because then I remember working the census in like 2020 and that presidential election. And like Native people were considered something else. So it started this whole chain of like memes that were like created and stuff, where it's like, you know, we went from being merciless Indian savages to being considered something else. It's like, are we ever going to be considered human? Like,
because it kind of changed too. Like I know the U.S. Census used to describe as like Native as like from U.S. or Alaskan Native American. Then at some point it changed to like American having ties Indian. To Central America, South America, right? Like
like I remember doing like. When I was applying to transfer in like 2017, 2018, even seeing like these various like indigenous identities finally represented and like,
sometimes mislabeled too.
Like mislabeled.
I saw Aztec and Mixteco at the same one. I was like, whoa.
I was like, damn, baby steps. But hopefully we'll get there one day.
Get there.
Damn, this it's interesting with Latinos because it's like also like, you know, you see certain countries have more of that presence, and like Bolivia, Peru, you know, like even like Ecuador, you know, stuff like that. And then you can
Argentina,
see, they're an interesting
Chile,
and then
Uruguay,
and then you see like those countries where it's like damn, y'all really just massacred most of your indigenous people here. Like,
Wow.
And can I share something real quick? Like, sorry, like I took a class on like political and economic development in Latin America, and it talked about like colonization, but the two forms of capital invasion that happened, like mercantilism and liberalism. And it was talking about like extraction in the sense of like the countries that you see now within Latin America, like if they still have a indigenous population, is because the correlation is that there was just a large number of them that they could enslave and essentially extract wealth through. But the countries that have much more of a lighter skin tone had much more or less of an indigenous presence, where the Europeans had to settle and essentially do the work themselves to extract the labor and send it back to Spain. And you can see that within parts of Mexico too, bro, where like certain regions of Mexico have like a lot of light-skinned people as opposed to like darker-skinned people. But you see it in like Latino America too. Like certain countries, like the phenotypical expression is that much more European side, right?
yeah, no. Damn, that's crazy. But it makes sense too. Like, just
because disease, war,
Yeah,
bro. Like,
like-
so you had to have high numbers in order for you to essentially survive.
yeah,
And you're like, oh shit, like that's tough, bro. Because then the other part was like, when the population, if it was wiped out, they brought in enslaved labor.
Yeah.
And you look at parts of Mexico and the ports, like Acapulco, parts of Colima, certain ports, that's where you'll have like Afro-Mexican identity, right? Because of the enslaved labor that was brought in, because the indigenous labor was wiped out.
yeah. No, and even like when Mexico finally like acknowledged like Afro-Mexicanos as like a legit population.
Yeah.
Like, I was like junior, senior year of high school, and it was like, yo, like how many more hundreds of years older are you than the U.S.? And
It was so late too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, and then also even like, and this is gonna be a whole taboo thing, but like the whole like Memín Pinguin like comics and stuff, and like that coming after like, you know, concerns were raised of like, hey, how are you portraying like your black population in Mexico? But kind of circling back, like I think for like Latin America, it's a little bit more complex because you know you have different phenotypes and you have certain countries with more of that presence than you have in like, you know, like you said, Uruguay and like Paraguay is a little bit more like, you know, kind of like a Mexico status where it's like, but I've heard like a lot of folks kind of praise Paraguay because they like really embedded, well, like it might almost when I explain it, it might sound a little convoluted, but it's almost like the Guarani people or like the indigenous people of like Paraguay and stuff, but they, I guess in an attempt to maybe save it, embedded it so much into the country that you might also at some point ask yourself, well, what other indigenous people were here that you maybe like overlooked to push this agenda of
It's like the Cherokee Princess narrative.
Bro, don't get me started on that.
It's where like certain white populations in the U.S. like they believe they're of Cherokee descent.
Yeah.
Like
Everyone.
One grandmother
So
long ago was a Cherokee
that's
princess.
the whole like 0.05%.
Yeah.
It's like
Elizabeth Warren type of shit.
yeah. Yeah, she did say
that. No, even at UC Riverside, there was a professor who came out like
really?
yeah. They're like claiming indigenous, and it turned out they didn't like have it.
Any connection,
I was
ancestry.
like, wow.
That's a lot.
But yeah, with the Latinos, it is very general, right? Like again, like so I think the advice would be like look up the history of your respective country, right, and kind of just like learn about
because every
that.
country has its history.
Like when I learned about like Guatemala, like there was the indigenous Maya and then the Latinos, or what they would call like the people that have assimilated with like capitalism and the neoliberalism movement, right?
Yeah.
And then certain factions of that would then lead to like the Maya genocide in Guatemala, and where like the people that are connected would call themselves like Maya in respective to their group, but the people that have a similar are like Latinos. They would, I've read it as a D instead of like the T, so that's what I'm saying like that.
Wow, that's,
you know, so like
I don't know. This is also make just European, you know, colonization. Did you guys see that soccer game, Senegal versus Morocco?
I didn't know,
but they were really going at it. They were fighting the fan. It got to a point where like the team and there was like fans jumping over the barricades trying to fight the Senegalians, right?
But they're both African countries, right?
They're both African countries, but if you notice with Morocco, right, more lighter skin complexion. I think there was a go ahead.
Why though?
Yeah, because of European conquest, no?
But because they're by the coast.
Yeah, by the coast,
So
yeah.
the port
Mm-hmm.
involves invasion.
Yeah, that's crazy. I was just seeing that, and I started to read through the comments, and it's like, yeah, that would make sense why they're so like racist, and
Yeah.
not in general, but just why we're seeing what we're seeing in a soccer game, you know. And it was a final, so I'm tensions were up. You know
But soccer has a history of being racist, bro. Like
FIFA,
Juventus and all that. Like, bro. Like, there's a lot of chants that like are very racially rooted in being racist. You know, so I think it leads to like the last question: can people be racially native but not necessarily, or racially indigenous but not necessarily? At least my experience in conversations has been that like within Mexico, like if you're not connected to like a pueblo or speak the language and participate in the culture, you're not indigenous, because it's like a cultural political identity within Mexico, because of like Mexico itself being like a settler colonial country and things like that, right? So
can I say that? Can I say I'm indigenous?
I don't know, like
that's where like my thing, that's where like my thing, that's why I want to
that's where
have this conversation, because I don't know if I'm overstepping some sort of boundary or whatever it is, and I want to be respectful. You know what I mean? Because obviously other people have put in more work than what I have put in.
Yeah.
And so what does that work look like, and is it appropriate for me? Just because I do have maybe the blood or the ancestry, but I don't practice the culture or the traditions.
Yeah.
Right?
Because similar to that, like my approach has been like I try to approach things through like a post-colonial lens, in the sense of like colonization happened in Mexico, right? So then this is where we're at now. And how phenotypically I express would be that of like a mestizo that would benefit from the current society structure in Mexico, right? I speak Spanish, I speak English, and then my next thing then would be like having done like the ancestry and based off the database, right, that they have, because I know it changes. Like it says that you have 48% indigenous ancestry. So then my question is then like, am I racially indigenous? Because I do respect that like stuff has evolved due to post contact, like with colonization, in the sense like I think it's important to respect how indigenous people today identify, because that's who we should listen to. Yeah. You know, and then I remember sharing that opinion with somebody else, and he was like, well, you're contributing to erasure. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm trying to listen to what indigenous people are saying today. And this person themselves identified as indigenous. And he was like, you're committing a paper genocide on yourself. That's what he told me. And I was like, okay, like, I guess it put me into like a position where it was like, damn, who do I listen to then? Like,
I guess my question to that was there further like clarification as to like in their eyes how it was like paper?
My understanding of it was like, if you have the indigenous blood in you, you have that connection to connect with your indigenous ancestry. Yeah. And even though your pueblo, etc., might have been wiped out, you classifying as non-indigenous is contributing to that erasure by upholding like the colonial understanding that like that's a thing of the past. You're no longer there because you're part Spanish. Does that?
Yeah, like the myth of the disappearing Indian kind of thing.
I've never heard that one, but I don't know if it would align with that.
So it's interesting because it makes me think of the native diaspora class that I talked about. One of the things that he mentioned was, obviously like mestizaje in Mexico was like a whole, almost like a scheme.
Yeah.
To like very much like, we'll leave them in the past and we'll move forward with this ideology of like, we're all one united, like Mexico, of mestizos, like everyone's 50-50. Like, even though Mexico doesn't explicitly have like a reservation system, for the communities that are indigenous, apparently like the way it works is once you leave your community, they strip you of that identity.
You're like excommunicado type of shit.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's like, so that's why, you have your folks who had to venture into the cities and you had folks who like stay behind, is to keep things like alive, stuff like that, which is very different from like the US and stuff, where it's like, if you're, classified as a legal native or whatever, like you don't have that issue.
You could be a urban, city native.
And like, so this question makes me think of like the whole generation that we lost to like the boarding schools, because, racially they are native, but they got it beaten out of them. So you have whole generations of folks who were like, unfortunately they didn't pass on what they knew because they got it beaten out of them, or it was like, forget this, you're American and stuff like that. So, we have it is a real thing, like where folks are racially indigenous, but not so much like connected or culturally, or they lost it. But I think there still is like a sense of validity and like almost a responsibility, because I remember when I was working at UCLA for this program, I met a youngster who was Mixteco, and we had this conversation. He was like, "Well, I don't know about like claiming indigeneity," and I remember talking to some like Zapoteco folks who had come like to hear like an author from Mexico speak, and they were the ones who posed the, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? Like, are you gonna let these white anthropologists keep writing fallacies about your people, or are you gonna maybe take one step towards empowering yourself? Like, it's not gonna be pretty, And I think like my answer to this question is like, us in the cities, we like complicate things so much to where like if we talk to folks south of the border, they may not answer in similar ways where they're like, just take it, like this is yours. And I know like those of us who are in academia and these spaces of higher ed, there's almost a reluctance, because it's like, we go through these different pedagogies, we go through these hoops, these hoops, like researching and stuff, and it's like, I don't know. And then not every person from south of the border is gonna feel that way, but there are people who are like, I would rather have you in the big city knowing these things and claiming it, even if you're not explicitly still tied to the communal lands, as opposed to some like dreadlock wearing Rasta white boy that's gonna come in like trying to get Maria Sabina's like mushrooms and stuff. So it is possible, like and we've had examples of like those folks that survived the boarding schools, or like folks who their families immigrated across the border. They'll talk about how their like grandparents or their parents had like Spanish beaten out of them and stuff. So I think it is possible. Like, you can be racially like indigenous, but you can also be disconnected.
Yeah, right.
Like, and that's where I think like the responsibility comes in, is those of us who identify when we come across people who are like in search of like extending that olive branch, and it's like, I may not have all the information for you, but I can give you a place of where to start. And I can, if I know people who are tapped in more to the community, like, a Zapoteco community member or whatever, like a Purepecha community member, like, let me call upon them and do like an in-kind handoff. It's like, I recognize the limitations of, how I can help people, and like my own knowledge, we're always going to be learning. We're always going to be students of life and of these ways, especially when it comes to indigeneity, because so many things got wiped out and burned by the church that it's like, I don't think we'll ever fully know everything, but whatever we do know, passing it down in the right way by folks who like will be respectful about it. For me, it's like, okay. And I've even had instances where I was like mentoring someone and they kind of just wrecked the whole like Sweat Lodge danza community space.
Oh, damn.
And like at a certain point I like pulled back, because I was like, you're going in asking questions, but you're asking questions that, like, I'm a firm believer that when you walk this path and, do ceremony, like, there's things that happen when they should.
Yeah.
And this individual was like asking questions, trying to jump over every single like step and go from like 1 to 100.
Yeah.
And they ended up causing like harm in the community. So like, that's where like I say, like, I tend to be a little bit more cautious and like a safekeeper, because I've seen firsthand what happens when folks take this, run, and cause harm. Yeah. So no, back to the question, I think you can be racially like native or indigenous but not be connected. And we've had examples. And I think like right now, there's folks who, because of immigration, 100,000 reasons, like phenotypically, visually, even ancestrally, can be like very indigenous presenting but still not know either, unfortunately, like, still to this day, sometimes in Mexico and like other parts, like, to be indigenous is to be backwards. Like, people will still make fun, people will still make jokes and stuff. Like, el indio bajado del cerro a tamborazos and stuff like that.
Tira flecha.
Yeah. So
and to close off, like, I think that as long as you begin that process, right, like connecting, asking questions, and essentially being respectful, right? Like, because I've heard the difference between like gatekeeping and safekeeping, right? Because there is people that will infiltrate, become the loudest voice, and then essentially take advantage of the privilege that they hold to talk over people that have been saying the same message for a long time, right?
Yeah.
You know, which is things that we see here in the U.S. And I think also because you mentioned like immigration is like, when I think about it, is like the U.S. would give you like the image of the Mexican, right? Like the dark skin, brown, short people with the sombrero, the sarape, and things like that. But then when you go to Mexico, Mexico's like, no, we don't look like that. Yeah. We're blue eyes, tall, light skin, you know. And I think it leads to a lot of people of Mexican descent here in the U.S. with this limbo and identity, you know. And I'm very glad that you came here today, you know, to kind of enlighten us with like what you've experienced, your own knowledge, you know, and we're very blessed to that. And I think one last question I have is then that I hear like a lot of people that online say, and we talked about it, is like, were the Aztec real or were they Mexica? Because we've heard like conflicting evidence, and where there's writings and where some people refer to themselves as Azteca, right? But then the people that would be the Aztecs weren't real. You're just a pretendian now.
You're talking about like post contact, like was that a name given, or was that name already existing before?
Like, it's very similar to the conversation of like, well, you can't be American, we're all American, like, you know, like, so, like, are there any parting words you have into the people that are beginning this journey and learn first about the Aztec? Were they real? Were they not? Should they refer to them as Mexica, or where do you stand on that?
So, in terms of like the Mexica question, like, it's been funny being on the sidelines and watching that unfold. I guess because of the way that I like learned it, it was very much like, no, like apparently, I'm gonna quote other people. I'm not gonna say that firmly, but what I've heard is like, you know, like they came from Aztlan and stuff like that, and they came to the Valley of Mexico as like Nahua Mexica people.
Yeah.
But it was from contact when they're like, oh, like, where are you from? Apparently, that they, you know, apparently they were said like, oh, I'm from like we come from Aztlan, or like the Seven Caves and stuff like that, and that in the relative ignorance of the invaders, that they took it as like, oh, Aztlan, you must be Azteca then.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where that comes from. So I've kind of like, the way I learned it was like, no, Azteca was the term given to them.
Yeah.
It's like with Huichol and like, you know, Huirarica and stuff, like it's you know, they call themselves, I saw a video recently where apparently like Huichol is in their language saying, I don't know what you're asking me. And that the Spanish were like, well, that sounds good to me. So, you know, you're Huichol.
What's your name? I don't understand you. Translate Huichol.
So like apparently it works similarly, but with like Mexica people. They're like, oh, where are you from? Yeah. And it's like, oh, we come from the Seven Caves of like Chicomostoc, which we call like Aztlan. And they're like, okay, well, you must be Azteca kind of thing.
Okay.
And then to the second part, I think for folks just looking to reconnect, it's take that first leap. Because I know there's folks who are very much like, because I've sometimes brought it up to people like, you know, a reluctance to like cross over and do their research and stuff. And it's like anything. If you don't take that first leap, you know, for folks trying to do like be gym bros or whatever, like you don't take that first leap, like nothing's gonna happen. You're just gonna be kind of lost in your ways, you know. But also like just be very conscious and respectful about how you approach it. Like one thing I've learned walking like this, you know, with this identity and like being in ceremony and everything, is things happen as they should when they should, and that's something that a lot of indigenous people will always like tell you is like a common like thought pattern, is like, don't rush anything. Like the information will come to you when it's supposed to come to you.
Okay.
Like just, you know, always be kind, respectful whenever you're in a space where, you know, you're not familiar with, or you're around people who you want to learn something from, but you know, just always be cordial and respectful. And that respect, like as long as you keep, you know, at it, doing things in a good way, you know, the information will come to you.
Okay.
It really sounds like, if I'm getting this correctly, right? Like just claiming indigeneity is, it's almost like you come to terms with the responsibility of what that takes, and that responsibility is there and it exists for anyone who has that. You know, I guess you could say the blood, the ancestry, and it's up to you really if you're ready to take on the responsibility. Because once you take on, like with anything that you're responsible for, you have to take care of it.
Yeah.
Right. And how do you take care of that? through questions, being a listener, like anything that you're learning for the first time, you're a sponge and you should be a sponge, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like beginning that with respect and then going from there. Because once the information is ready to come to you, it'll come to you.
And asking questions, because sometimes it's ugly truths, you know, like sometimes, bro, you might just be the colonizer, bro. Like you might just be the settler, you know, like, but understanding the respect and engaging community that comes with that, you know, and essentially decolonizing the thoughts and learning from indigenous people, practices, and way of life, you know. So thank you for joining us today, bro. Like,
awesome,
we're very excited to have you. Yeah, you know,
nice to meet you. I met him for the first time today. So.
I know. All right.
That's awesome.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
It's Skyway.